January 17, 1943. A bitter wind cuts through the dense forest on the outskirts of northern France. Snowflakes settle silently on the branches, masking the faint trail left by a lone figure moving with calculated precision. Each breath forms a cloud, lingering in the frigid air, while the distant hum of German trucks echoes through the valley below. He crouches behind a frozen thicket, eyes fixed on a cluster of wooden sheds illuminated by the flickering glow of lanterns. The fuel depot, a vital lifeline for the German war machine, it sits heavily guarded, every patrol route memorized, every sentry pattern noted. One wrong step could mean capture, or worse. In his pack, small satchel charges, detonators, and a map marked with painstaking detail. His heart pounds, yet his hands remain steady. He is alone, trapped behind enemy lines. The world he knew seems miles away, replaced by a silence broken only by the occasional bark of a distant dog or the crunch of his own boots on the snow. Tonight, everything depends on him. One man, one chance, and the destruction of a target that could shift the course of local battles. The forest waits. The night waits. And so does fate. By the winter of 1942 to 43, Europe had been engulfed in war for nearly 3 years. The German war machine, powered by oil, coal, and the relentless movement of men and material, stretched from the Atlantic coast of France to the steppes of Russia. Every tank, every truck, every plane required fuel. Precisely the lifeblood that Allied and resistance forces had begun to target with increasing precision. Fuel depots were not merely warehouses. They were strategic arteries. Destroy one, and a panzer division could grind to a halt. An air squadron might be grounded, and supply convoys would stall on frozen roads. The German high command understood this vulnerability, yet the vastness of occupied territory made each depot a target almost impossible to guard entirely. It was within this gap that resistance networks and special operatives found their purpose. In France, the occupation had taken on a ruthless efficiency. By 1943, the Gestapo, Wehrmacht patrols, and local collaborators maintained a strict regime of control. Rail lines were patrolled with automatic weapons, roads were monitored by checkpoints, and fuel depots were fortified with guards, searchlights, and barbed wire. The German army was stretched thin, however, facing threats on multiple fronts. The Eastern Front against the Red Army, the North African campaigns, and the looming Allied buildup in Britain. This tension created openings for a new kind of warfare. Not massed armies advancing over open fields, but small, agile teams operating in the shadows. Men and women who could infiltrate enemy lines, sabotage critical infrastructure, and vanish into the night. These were the missions of the Special Operations Executive, SOE, formed in 1940 to set Europe ablaze, as its directive famously stated. SOE operatives trained in explosives, guerrilla tactics, and survival behind enemy lines. They were ordinary civilians transformed into deadly instruments of disruption. Fuel depots quickly became high-value targets. In occupied France, the SOE worked closely with local resistance groups, Maquis fighters, railway saboteurs, and intelligence networks to identify weak points in German supply chains. The depots themselves varied. Some were vast complexes of wooden tanks and warehouses, others simple underground bunkers carved in the hillsides. Guards followed strict routines, but human error, weather, and terrain could create exploitable gaps. Snowy nights, frozen forests, and fog became the cover that operatives relied upon. The stakes were immense. A single depot's destruction could delay armored divisions for weeks, disrupt fuel convoys, and force German commanders to redirect troops to guard logistics instead of fighting on the front lines. Yet the danger was equally immense. Every mission carried the risk of capture, torture, or death. Operatives often traveled alone, carrying only essential explosives, maps, and survival gear. Their movements had to be silent, precise, and utterly uncompromising. One misstep, one patrol alert, could trigger a fatal chain of events. Beyond the physical challenges, there was the psychological toll. Living behind enemy lines required constant vigilance. Sleep was a luxury. Fear was constant, yet it had to be managed. Resistance fighters and SOE agents learned to convert that fear into focus. Each mission demanded not just skill, but an unflinching ability to remain calm under pressure. The human element, often overlooked in larger military histories, was critical to success or failure. By early 1943, Allied intelligence had begun to feed SOE operatives increasingly precise information: guard rotations, depot layouts, and rail schedules. Every detail mattered. Each mission was a calculated gamble, weighing risk against the potential disruption to the German war effort. In many cases, a single operative could achieve what entire battalions could not: crippling enemy supply lines while remaining unseen, leaving the enemy confused and vulnerable. It was in this climate of tension, opportunity, and extreme danger that our protagonist found himself, trapped, alone, behind enemy lines, facing the daunting task of destroying a German fuel depot. The stakes were clear. Failure would mean not only his own death, but the continued operation of a critical German supply node. Success, however, could ripple through enemy lines, delaying reinforcements, grounding vehicles, and marking a small but significant victory in the broader tapestry of war. The night was cold, the forest silent, but the operation was ready to begin. Behind enemy lines, in a war defined by shadows, the fate of one man and the disruption of a vital target would soon collide. The forested region north of the Loire River was as strategic as it was unforgiving. Rolling hills, dense pines, and frozen rivers created a natural labyrinth that both aided and hindered movement. For the German occupiers, it was a patchwork of supply routes and guarded depots, each crucial to maintaining armored and mechanized divisions farther east. Patrols were constant, but the terrain favored those who knew it intimately. Local villagers whispered of shadows moving under snow-laden branches, of glimmers of light darting across open fields. These rumors, often dismissed by German officers, were the prelude to countless acts of sabotage. Resistance networks in the area had been active since 1941. Small, decentralized cells of partisans, railway workers, and sympathetic villagers coordinated intelligence, disrupted convoys, and assisted SOE operatives in infiltrating the occupied zones. They knew the dangers firsthand. Each contact risked betrayal. Each message, if intercepted, could compromise lives. Yet their commitment was unwavering. They understood that even a single depot destroyed could ripple across the German supply chain. Fuel depots, in particular, were heavily prioritized. Guard rotations followed a predictable rhythm, but human error persisted. Bored sentries, miscounted patrols, or snow-covered footprints could provide the crucial window for an operative to act. Some depots were equipped with rudimentary anti-sabotage measures: fences, searchlights, and guard dogs. Others relied on natural defenses: frozen marshes, steep embankments, or dense forests that channeled movement into narrow approaches. Understanding these patterns was critical to any operation. The German logistical chain was stretched thin. While the Wehrmacht maintained strict discipline, the sheer size of occupied territories created gaps. Intelligence reports from captured officers and intercepted communications revealed that fuel was often stockpiled in satellite depots before being moved to the front. These smaller depots were sometimes less guarded, yet no less valuable. A single successful strike could delay entire mechanized columns, forcing high command to divert troops to guard supply lines instead of pushing offensives forward. Our operatives' mission emerged from these vulnerabilities. Selected for his training in explosives, navigation, and survival, he was briefed with maps, guard schedules, and a depot layout. Local resistance provided additional intelligence, which paths were clear, which villages to avoid, and where German patrols might concentrate. Every step had been meticulously planned, yet the margin for error remained razor-thin. The night could shift a mission from triumph to disaster in an instant. The environment itself was a test. January brought frigid temperatures, snow that muffled movement but left tracks, and rivers that could freeze just enough to support passage, or betray a crossing with a sudden crack. Every shadow could conceal an enemy patrol. Every sound could betray a hiding operative. Yet it was also the operative's ally. The same cold and darkness that hindered German mobility offered cover, masking his movements through the forest. Psychologically, the mission was no less daunting. Alone, behind enemy lines, he faced the dual threats of capture and isolation. Communication with Allied forces was impossible. Success depended solely on his skill, resourcefulness, and resolve. Unlike a conventional soldier advancing with a battalion, he carried not only explosives, but the weight of responsibility. One mistake could lead to death, imprisonment, or compromise of the local resistance network. And yet, history shows that operations like this, small in scale but precise in execution, could deliver outsized impacts. By the winter of 1943, SOE and partisan missions had destroyed countless fuel depots, bridges, and rail lines, temporarily paralyzing German operations and forcing strategic redeployments. Each act of sabotage was a reminder that war was not fought solely on the front lines. It was also waged in the shadows, in the forests, and in the frozen nights where a single operative could alter the course of events. This was the environment in which he now moved. A forest alive with danger, a depot alive with strategic value, and a war alive with opportunity. The mission was clear: infiltrate, plant explosives, and escape. All that remained was execution, the delicate ballet between life, death, and the fragile rhythm of winter night. Alone in the forest, every decision carried immense weight. Fear was constant, but it had to be controlled. For the operative, the human element of the mission was as critical as any explosive device. Survival depended on focus, patience, and an almost unnatural calm. He moved like a shadow, listening for the crunch of snow under enemy boots, sensing the rhythm of distant patrols, and constantly calculating the safest path forward. Each step reminded him of the stakes. He was not only risking his life, but the lives of local villagers, the resistance network, and the broader operational objectives. Trust was scarce. One slip could unravel weeks of intelligence work. Yet courage was not the absence of fear, it was the mastery of it. By relying on instinct honed through rigorous training, he converted anxiety into vigilance, uncertainty into precision. Sleep was a distant memory. Hunger gnawed at him, and frostbite nipped at exposed fingers. Yet the mental strain of isolation was the greatest challenge. Conversations with himself, careful mental rehearsals, and a relentless focus on the mission became lifelines. In these moments, humanity and duty intertwined. He was more than a soldier. He was a symbol of defiance, operating in the shadows where ordinary rules of war seemed suspended. The human element extended beyond the operative himself. Local resistance members played an essential role, quietly supporting, guiding, and informing without ever exposing themselves. Their courage, often unseen, formed a safety net. Each small act of trust, each shared piece of intelligence, was a human chain spanning occupied territories, connecting the operative to a larger, invisible force fighting from within. The mission's success depended on meticulous tactical planning. A fuel depot, though stationary, was protected by multiple layers of defense: perimeter guards, sentry dogs, patrol routes, and sometimes improvised barricades. Reconnaissance was essential. Days before the operation, local contacts had mapped patrol timings, identified blind spots, and noted areas where snow or darkness could mask movement. Approach routes were carefully chosen. The operative favored terrain that offered cover but required slower movement, balancing stealth against speed. He had memorized key landmarks, frozen streams, hollow trees, and depressions in the snow that could provide concealment. Timing was everything. Arriving too early risked exposure. Arriving too late could mean missed opportunity or heightened enemy alertness. Explosives were selected for precision. Satchel charges, small yet powerful, were ideal for destroying fuel tanks while minimizing collateral risk. Detonators had to be handled delicately. Frost could compromise fuses, and excessive jostling could trigger a premature blast. Placement required not just technical knowledge, but tactical ingenuity, choosing points that would maximize destruction while enabling a clean escape route. The operative also had to anticipate enemy reactions. Guard would likely investigate sounds, unusual lights, or footprints. Contingency plans were embedded in the mission, multiple escape routes, temporary hiding points, and strategies for misdirection. Even small details, such as brushing snow off the path to avoid tracks, could mean the difference between life and death. Coordination with a broader resistance network, though indirect, was tactical in itself. While the operative moved alone, the network's intelligence shaped the operation. They monitored supply movements, relayed patrol changes, and even provided signals that could divert attention temporarily. This interconnected approach turned an individual act into a strategic ripple, demonstrating the tactical sophistication of small unit operations in occupied territories. The tactical dimension of the mission was not solely about avoiding detection. It was about understanding the psychology of the enemy, the layout of the terrain, and the behavior of both human and mechanical elements. Success required an intimate knowledge of these variables, combined with adaptability and decisiveness under pressure. The operation's success hinged not only on human skill, but on mastery of technology, specifically the tools of sabotage. Explosives in 1943 were both powerful and temperamental. Satchel charges, the mainstay of behind-the-lines operations, were compact, portable, and devastating when placed correctly. Yet they required precision handling. Moisture, cold, or mishandling could render them inert or trigger an unintended detonation. For this mission, the operative carried small charges tailored to pierce fuel tanks and ignite volatile contents, ensuring maximum destruction while limiting collateral risks to nearby structures or civilians. Detonators represented another critical layer of technology. Early SOE detonators relied on chemical fuses that needed careful preparation, often minutes before deployment. A misstep, a frayed wire, a frozen chemical compound, or an uneven ignition could sabotage the mission entirely. Operatives trained rigorously, not only in assembly, but in contingency planning. Backup fuses, redundant triggers, and timing mechanisms calibrated to the second. Precision, in this context, was a matter of survival. Tools were also crucial. Wire cutters, grappling hooks, and small sleds for moving charges through snow-laden forests became extensions of the operative's body. Every piece of equipment was meticulously selected and packed to minimize noise and maximize efficiency. Even clothing served a technological function. Winter camouflage, insulated layers, and footwear designed for silent movement. Technology in this mission was invisible yet omnipresent, a silent partner guiding every step through enemy lines. On the other side, German defenses represented a formidable challenge. Fuel depots were not simply warehouses. They were strategic nodes protected by multiple layers of human and mechanical vigilance. Guards followed strict routines, often aided by sentry dogs trained to detect unusual scents or sounds. Patrols crisscrossed open areas at predictable intervals, while searchlights scanned perimeters for anomalies. Barbed wire, fences, and makeshift barricades slowed any intruder, providing soldiers precious seconds to react. Despite this, the German system was not infallible. Routine bred predictability. Patterns, once observed, became exploitable. Patrols left gaps, and guards, lulled by repetition, sometimes failed to notice subtle irregularities. Winter conditions further complicated defense. Snow could mask footprints or muffle footsteps. Fog could obscure visibility, and frozen ground made certain barriers brittle or collapsible. A trained operative could turn the enemy's strengths into weaknesses with careful observation and timing. Intelligence, or lack thereof, also shaped the enemy perspective. German commanders relied on reports from field officers, yet the scale of occupied territories meant every depot could not be monitored constantly. Reports of sabotage elsewhere forced reallocation of troops, stretching defenses even thinner. For an enemy aware that the French countryside was alive with resistance, every shadow carried the potential for disruption, yet anticipating the exact moment and location of an attack was nearly impossible. The psychological dimension was equally significant. Guards, isolated in remote locations, faced long nights and bitter cold. Fatigue, boredom, and fear of partisan activity created subtle cracks in vigilance. An operative who understood these human elements could exploit hesitation or misjudgment, turning enemy psychology into an operational advantage. Together, technology and enemy weaknesses formed the delicate balance upon which the mission rested. Precision explosives met predictable patrols, silent tools enabled careful infiltration, and human observation intersected with mechanical ingenuity. The interplay of these factors created both peril and opportunity. The operative was a single variable in a system of complexity, yet one whose actions could tip the scales in favor of the Allies. As the night deepened, snow continuing to fall and the cold biting through layers of clothing, the operative prepared to merge human courage, tactical planning, technological mastery, and enemy observation into a single act. In a matter of hours, the fuel depot would either burn in calculated destruction or remain a stubborn obstacle. The outcome depended on skill, precision, and the unforgiving variables of chance. The night was absolute. Snow fell silently, thickening the forest floor and muffling sound. The operative moved cautiously, each step deliberate, boots pressing into powdery drifts without leaving a trail easily detected by sentries. Every breath rose and dissipated in the cold air like smoke from a distant chimney. Somewhere beyond the tree line, the hum of German vehicles on icy roads reminded him of the ticking clock, the soldiers, the patrols, the ever-watchful eyes. He approached the depot from the north, following a narrow ravine that served as natural cover. The perimeter fence loomed ahead, topped with barbed wire that glinted under the dim light of a moon obscured by clouds. A single sentry paced along the eastern side, rifle slung, but eyes scanning. Timing was crucial. For 22 minutes, he waited, crouched in a depression beneath the snow-laden pines, tracking the guard's pattern. One miscalculation, and the operation would end before it began. Satchel charges were prepped in his backpack, each carefully wrapped with insulated cloth to prevent moisture from compromising the explosive. Detonators were kept separate, ready to be assembled at the last possible moment. The operative's gloved hands worked with methodical precision, an almost mechanical rhythm born from endless hours of training. His mind, however, remained hyper-aware, listening, watching, calculating. Every sound, a snapping branch, the distant bark of a dog, could signal danger. The approach required bypassing 2 additional patrol routes. The first was a gravel path cleared of snow, betraying every step. He paused, scanning the darkness, waiting for the patrol to pass. Then, like a shadow in the snow, he moved swiftly, using the cover of a frozen embankment to mask his presence. The second patrol, heavier and armed with dogs, forced a temporary halt behind a thicket. The cold bit deeper now, but the operative remained still, counting heartbeats, synchronizing his movement with the rhythm of the enemy. Finally, he reached the depot itself. The wooden sheds loomed, barrels of fuel stacked in tight rows. Lanterns flickered against the walls, throwing elongated shadows. The placement of explosives demanded meticulous calculation. Each charge had to ensure maximum rupture of the fuel tanks while minimizing the risk of early detection. He crouched low, planting charges beneath key tanks, anchoring them with ropes and stakes, and aligning detonators to ensure sequential ignition. Every movement was accompanied by a mental checklist: detonation timing, escape route, observation points. The operative paused, listening to the ambient sounds, the distant creak of a truck axle, the occasional murmur of a German soldier, the wind whispering through pine needles. He reminded himself, one man could shift the course of events tonight, but only if he remained precise, silent, and unerring in focus. The final charge was set. A short fuse connected to the central cluster of fuel tanks. One spark would ignite a chain reaction, consuming barrels, sheds, and the depot itself. The operative stepped back into the shadows, every muscle tensed, aware that in moments the night would erupt with fire and smoke. And yet, the danger was not over. Escape routes had to be navigated while guards were alerted by sound or light. Each second after detonation would bring a surge of adrenaline, confusion, and pursuit. The operative's success depended not only on planting explosives, but on merging human cunning, terrain mastery, and calculated risk into a seamless motion toward survival. He crouched one final time, ensuring no trace of movement betrayed his position, then ignited the fuse. A faint sizzle sounded against the cold air, barely perceptible, yet a heartbeat that carried the weight of the mission's outcome. Smoke would soon rise, flames would consume the depot, and the forest would bear witness to a single act of calculated defiance. The first sparks of fire began to curl around the edges of the wooden sheds. The distant patrol was unaware, the night still thick with silence. Every second now was a countdown to chaos, the moment when human courage, tactical mastery, and technological precision converged into explosive reality. The fuse hissed its final seconds. Snowflakes drifted silently onto the operative's shoulders as he pressed himself into a shadowed ditch, heart hammering, eyes fixed on the depot. The first flames licked the sides of the wooden sheds, a faint orange glow flickering against the cold night. Then, with a sudden roar, the main stockpile detonated. A wall of fire erupted, sending barrels tumbling and igniting clouds of fuel that shimmered in the moonlight. The blast reverberated across the valley, shaking the forest and setting off distant alarm bells. Wooden beams splintered, shattering into shards that hissed as they struck the snow. Smoke and fire coiled upward, a towering column visible for miles. The depot, once a symbol of German supply and order, was now chaos incarnate. Flames licked the night sky, consuming barrels, sheds, and everything in between. From the periphery, guards shouted warnings. Dogs barked furiously, and boots crunched through snow as patrols surged toward the inferno. Spotlights swept the tree line, slicing through the darkness in frantic arcs. Yet the operative was already moving, every motion calculated. He had memorized multiple escape routes, a narrow ravine leading west, a frozen stream to the south, and a hollowed tree line to the north. Tonight, only one path would be taken, swift, silent, and direct. He pressed along the ravine, snow dampening sound, wind masking movement. Behind him, shouts grew louder, and German rifles cracked in the distance. Sparks from the blaze illuminated fleeting glimpses of soldiers scanning the tree line, but the operative melted into the shadows, each step precise, every breath controlled. The forest was his ally. Frozen roots and snow-covered depressions became cover, natural obstacles that slowed his pursuers. The psychological intensity of the moment was suffocating. Adrenaline surged, muscles burned from exertion, and the chill gnawed at exposed skin. Every snap of a branch, every distant bark, demanded split-second calculation. Yet training and preparation guided him, converting fear into motion, panic into controlled agility. He became simultaneously hyper-aware and methodically focused, a single agent navigating a forest alive with danger. After several hundred meters, he reached the frozen stream. Ice groaned underfoot, threatening to betray his presence, but he pressed on, careful to distribute weight and step lightly. Behind him, the fire's glow flickered against trees, illuminating patches of snow where patrols might see tracks. Every movement was a balance of speed and stealth. One misstep, and all his effort, all the months of planning and intelligence gathering, could collapse in a single instant. The detonation had not only destroyed the depot, but also sent ripples through the German defensive network. Nearby units were forced to respond, dividing forces, checking patrol routes, and investigating false leads. In those critical minutes, the operative exploited confusion, using it to create distance between himself and the chaos he had sown. What began as a single man's act behind enemy lines had already forced a strategic recalibration, proving that even small operations could yield disproportionate effects. Hours later, as the first hints of dawn touched the horizon, he reached a rendezvous point known only to local resistance contacts. Exhausted, frostbitten, and exhilarated, he paused to watch smoke still rising from the depot in the distance. The mission was complete, the target destroyed, and German supply lines disrupted. Yet survival remained the priority. He would continue moving until fully beyond reach, blending into forests, villages, and winter mist, leaving only a trail of fire and chaos as testimony to the night's events. The climax of the operation was now history. One man, armed with training, courage, and explosives, had executed a mission few battalions could achieve. The depot was gone. The enemy was scrambling. And behind the devastation lay the human story. Calm determination under extreme pressure, the blending of mind and muscle, technology and terrain, planning and improvisation. As the forest quieted, save for distant alarms and the crackling remnants of fire, the operative disappeared into the winter landscape. One mission, one night, one decisive act that would echo across German supply chains and mark the culmination of preparation, skill, and resolve. The forest grew quiet once more, save for the distant crackle of smoldering wood and the occasional clatter of debris settling into snow. The German fuel depot, once a hub of supply and movement, had been reduced to a scorched skeleton of beams, twisted barrels, and leaking fuel igniting in small pockets. The night's explosion had created chaos that would ripple far beyond the immediate perimeter. Patrols scoured the area, rifles raised, dogs straining against their leashes, yet the operative had vanished, leaving nothing but footprints soon to be covered by the wind and snow. The immediate military impact was palpable. Fuel reserves critical for mechanized divisions were destroyed, forcing local German commanders to reroute supplies from more distant depots. Convoys were delayed, armored units grounded, and maintenance schedules disrupted. Reports later filed by German officers noted a sudden, devastating destruction in the region, highlighting both the strategic vulnerability of supply nodes and the effectiveness of small-scale sabotage operations. Even a single depot could alter operational planning, and this night had demonstrated that principle in stark relief. For the operative, survival remained the primary concern. He navigated frozen rivers, dense forests, and abandoned paths, relying on both training and local intelligence to avoid detection. Hunger, frostbite, and exhaustion were constant threats, but he moved with the singular focus that had carried him through infiltration and detonation. Every step taken away from the depot was measured, deliberate, and necessary. One wrong turn could lead to capture, yet he pressed on, knowing that in the coming hours, the full consequences of his actions would begin to unfold. The local resistance, alerted after the explosion, moved swiftly to provide support. Safe houses, sympathetic villagers, and hidden paths formed a network that ensured the operative could remain unseen until completely beyond enemy reach. This cooperation exemplified the symbiotic relationship between operatives and the civilian networks that sustained them. In war, the success of one depended heavily on the vigilance, courage, and discretion of many. Meanwhile, German officers scrambled to assess the damage. Reconnaissance reports noted that fuel tanks had exploded with extreme force, destroying both the primary depot and surrounding storage. Engineers were dispatched to contain fires, prevent secondary explosions, and restore supply lines as quickly as possible. Yet every hour spent on recovery was an hour lost in operational capability. Commanders began to recognize a pattern. The Allies and resistance were striking where German oversight was weakest, exploiting gaps that, once highlighted, demanded reinforcement and diverted resources from the front lines. This immediate aftermath highlighted both the destructive power of a single operative and the broader strategic consequences. It was a vivid demonstration that war was not only fought by armies in open fields, but also in the shadows, where careful planning, precise execution, and courageous action could shift the balance, if only temporarily. The night's mission would soon become a story reported in intelligence files, recounted by resistance members, and analyzed by German officers as an example of the unpredictability of small unit operations. For the operative, however, the immediate concern remained simple: continue moving, stay unseen, and survive the journey home. By dawn, the destruction of the fuel depot had already begun to ripple across German operations in the region. Armored units awaiting refueling were delayed, forcing temporary suspension of planned patrols and offensives. Commanders had to divert resources to secure alternate supply routes and protect other depots, thinning their presence along critical roads. What had been a single, localized act of sabotage became a strategic complication for the occupiers, demonstrating how small operations could have outsized effects on larger military campaigns. Intelligence reports later noted that the loss of this depot directly affected fuel distribution for the Wehrmacht in northern France for several weeks. Tank units operating near the front were forced to reduce training exercises, while supply convoys faced increased scrutiny and congestion as alternate depots attempted to compensate. Even minor delays in fuel availability could cascade into operational setbacks, a tactical ripple that extended far beyond the immediate blast zone. The German military also faced psychological consequences. Officers began to regard remote depots with suspicion, wary of potential sabotage at any moment. Guard routines were altered, patrols increased, and morale among sentries fluctuated between heightened vigilance and stress-induced fatigue. Intelligence files from this period describe unseen adversaries moving at night as a persistent concern, forcing commanders to reallocate manpower and resources. The operative had become more than a threat to a single depot. He had introduced uncertainty into an otherwise controlled system. For the resistance, the success of the operation served as both validation and motivation. Stories of the depot's destruction circulated among partisans and local allies, reinforcing the effectiveness of collaboration with SOE operatives. It demonstrated that careful planning, intelligence gathering, and precise execution could achieve victories disproportionate to the size of the force involved. For a network often operating in fear of capture or betrayal, this success strengthened morale and inspired future operations, creating a tangible example of impact against a seemingly invincible occupier. The operative himself, once safely beyond enemy lines, became part of a chain of stories told in safe houses and intelligence briefings. While his identity remained largely concealed, reports documented the sequence of events, detailing the timing, placement, and outcome of the sabotage. Allied command recognized the operation as an exemplary case of small unit effectiveness. One man, armed with explosives, training, and courage, capable of altering local operational dynamics. In the stillness of the forest, long after flames had consumed the depot, one man's act remained a quiet testament to courage and ingenuity. Behind enemy lines in the harsh winter cold, he had achieved what entire battalions might struggle to accomplish. A decisive blow to the machinery of war, executed with precision, patience, and unwavering focus. Yet beyond the explosion, beyond the disruption of German logistics, lay a deeper truth about the nature of warfare. History is often written in sweeping campaigns, massive battles, and grand strategies, but is also shaped by the small, shadowed moments where individuals confront impossible odds. The operative's mission revealed the profound impact of human agency. That one person, armed with knowledge, skill, and resolve, could alter the course of events and leave a mark disproportionate to their size. The destruction of a single fuel depot became more than tactical victory. It became a symbol of resistance, resourcefulness, and a calculated defiance of oppression. Technological mastery, tactical planning, and human courage intersected in this operation, illustrating the complex interplay of factors that define war. Yet the act was not merely mechanical. It was emotional and moral. The operative carried the weight of lives, of communities, and of history itself in his hands. In the cold night, every calculated step, every planted explosive, was a negotiation between fear and responsibility, risk and duty. Ultimately, the story of this night endures because it embodies the quiet heroism often lost in broader narratives of war. The depot's destruction delayed enemy operations, strengthened the resolve of local resistance, and contributed to the larger Allied effort. But perhaps more importantly, it demonstrated the enduring truth that courage, ingenuity, and determination can persist even in the darkest circumstances. The snow fell again, covering the traces of his passage, as if the forest itself acknowledged the fleeting, yet profound, impact of one human action. In the grand machinery of history, small acts of bravery leave echoes, silent, enduring, and transformative. This night, one man behind enemy lines forever changed the landscape of a battle, and with it, a fragment of the world's story.